Dragons, along with titties, are probably my favorite part of Game of Thrones. In this video, I want to discuss every single dragon who has ever existed in A Song of Ice and Fire. Now before we get started, please slap a like on this video, as the like goal is going to be 420. Also, make sure you're subscribed, and then, this is the most important part, make sure you have your notifications turned on, so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a video. Long night! Now before I get into just straight up listing all the different dragons and how they died, I want to start with describing what exactly is a dragon. Now, one of the main things that sort of sets these dragons apart from most dragons in fantasy is the fact that while they may be divided into male and female subcategories, most of the dragons are actually capable of being male or female, whichever one is needed to carry on the species. Now, I'm sure most of you are aware, but dragons are native to the continent of Essos, and you know the show mainly takes place in Westeros. And from the history that we've been taught, the first people to bring over dragons into Westeros were actually House Targaryen. Now, there are actually rumors, I guess I should say theories, that exist in the fandom that Targaryens weren't the first dragon riders to come over to Westeros. Dragonstones served as an outpost for House Targaryen before the fall of Valyria, so they had been known to visit the continent before then, but a lot of people think that there may have been dragons during the time of the reign of the First Men and the fighting between the Children of the Forest. A lot of people think that there may have actually been a dragon involved with the construction of the wall. And just a quick note before we move on, most of these theories do have a lot more ability to tread water in the novels as opposed to the television series. Now, one interesting fact about dragons is that the actual dragon eggs themselves, while they're, being made, they look like they're stone and they're covered in scales, but they can actually remain viable for well over 150 years, and they need to be surrounded by intense heat in order for them to hatch. This is why most of the early Valyrian dragon lords would make dragon hatcheries inside caves that were close to volcanoes. Now, since we just talked about how dragon eggs looks, what better than to talk about how actual dragons look? Now, this is interesting. On the show, we get a red dragon, which has got black scales, Drogon, and we have Viserion, the undead dragon, who was originally supposed to be cream with golden scales, and then lastly we have Regio, who is green. Now, what's interesting is that if you go back in the history of House Targaryen, their dragons have actually ranged all the way from being black to silver to red to gold to even blue. Now, while some of these dragons of old may have had been one solid color all the way throughout, the most common pattern marking for dragons are sort of one predominant color, which would cover like their scales and underbelly on the top part, and then they would have a highlighted or an accent color that would sort of color parts of their facial features or just other horns throughout their body. Now, most dragons grow to be very large in size, but what's interesting about these A Song of Ice and Fire dragons is that they technically never stop growing. They grow all the way up until the day they die. This means that some dragons, like Balerion the Black Dread, are actually involved with major House Targaryen events all the way from the founding of Westeros, the uniting of the Seven Kingdoms, to being ridden by a later member of House Targaryen 100 years later. Now, aside from flight, all of these dragons have the ability to breathe fire. In Westeros and Essos, it's thought to be that their fire-breathing ability is somewhat magic, but as we can tell from the TV show, it looks like they have two side slits on their mouth that secrete this most likely gas fluid, and then it's ignited. Or I guess more accurate, it may be two different fluids that when kept separately aren't ignitable and flammable, but when they're combined, they become extremely combustible. So maybe in the dragon's neck, there's two different sacs, one containing a propellant and the other one containing an igniter. Or I guess it could just be magic. And now on to listing all of the dragons who ever have existed. Now, we'll start during the time of Aegon's Landing. Basically, Aegon the Conqueror, when he came over to unite the 6 kingdoms, later 7. So, the dragons that existed during his time frame are Balerion the Black Dread, Meraxes, and Vhagar. Balerion was, of course, ridden by Aegon the Conqueror. Meraxes was ridden by Rhaenys, who was Aegon's sister. And Vhagar was ridden by Visenya, who was also Aegon's sister. And now we're moving on to the dragons during Jaehaerys the First's reign. Vermithor, who was ridden by Jaehaerys the First Targaryen, Silverwing, who was ridden by his wife, Alicent, and lastly, Dreamfire, who was the dragon of Rhaenyra Targaryen. Now, Vhagar and Balerion were still alive during Jaehaerys' reign, but they died sometime throughout. I think 130 AC and 101 AC. Next up, these are the dragons that were present during A Dance of Dragons, and I'm actually making videos on those, and I have made a video on the beginning part of that, which you can check the link down below. But on the green side of the Dance of Dragons, we had Sunfire the golden, who was Aegon II's dragon. Then we had Vhagar, who is now being ridden by Aemon Targaryen, Dreamfire, who was ridden by Rhaenyra, but is now ridden by Helena, Tessarion, aka the Blue Queen, who was ridden by Daeron Targaryen, Morgul, who was bound to Jaehaera Targaryen, and Sheikros, who was bound to Jaehaerys Targaryen. Now on to the black side. We had Syrinx, who was Rhaenyra Targaryen's she-dragon. Then we had Meleys, the Red Queen, who was Princess Rhaenys Targaryen. Sorry about that, all these names sound the goddamn same. Caraxes, the Bloodworm, who was ridden by Prince Daemon Targaryen. Vermax, who was ridden by Prince Jacaerys Valerion. Arax, who was ridden by Lucerys Valerion. Tyrax, who was ridden by Joffrey Valerion. Moondancer, who was ridden by Baela Targaryen. Stormcloud, who was bonded with Aegon the Younger, but Aegon never really got to ride him. Then we had Sheepstealer, who was one of my personal favorites. That's Nettle's dragon, who was a dragon seed. Then we had Sea Smoke, who was formerly Laenor Valerion's pride and joy, but is now ridden by Adam Valerion. Now, there were a few dragons to switch sides from the blacks to the greens during the Dance of Dragons, and that was Vermithor and Silverwing. In my next Dance of Dragons video, I will go into detail onto why those dragons turned cold, or why the rider of those dragons switched sides, rather. Now, there were two dragons that were mostly neutral during that time frame of the Dance of Dragons, and one of them who was Cannibal, and he was never ridden and was pretty much a wild dragon who would chow down on the carcasses of other dragons. And then lastly, there was Grey Ghost, who was, you know, pretty much out in the wild, and he was also never ridden. Now, up until Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion, no dragons had really been seen in King's Landing other than one by Sir Arlen of Pennytree, and that was around 150 AL. And he said the dragon that he saw wasn't exactly combat worthy. Now, I'm sure most of you are aware that dragons and magic are pretty much linked in Game of Thrones, and after the Dance of Dragons and most of the Targaryen dragons were killed, magic from the Western world seemed to pretty much disappear until, you know, the Red Comet at the beginning of the Game of Thrones series. Now, in my opinion, there were some dragons who were still alive in this time frame. They were just in hiding. I think they were mostly over in Essos. We do know this is where Daenerys' dragon eggs were, but maybe the dragons that were still alive flew to Volantis and to Essos, maybe to the ruins of ancient Valyria in order to survive off of the lingering magic that may be in old Valyria. You all jot down below real quick what you think may have happened to the dragons during the time frame after the Dance of Dragons before Daenerys comes to Westeros. Also, which one of these dragons that I just listed is your favorite? Alright, and with that being said, I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you could please slap a like on this video, as the like goal is going to be 420. Also, make sure you're subscribed, and then this is the most important part. Make sure you have your notifications turned on so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a video. Long night. Super special shout out to every single member of my Patreon family over on patreon.com, and a super special shout out again to everyone watching this video. My name's Mark, and this has been Sir Hunt's Reviews.